around the Bhakti Center community around the world. So good to be with all of you. Okay, so let's dive right into Srimad Bhagavatam. I'm just going to pull up our verse. Okay, so we are reading from chapter 10 continued. Canto 10, chapter 23, verses 41 and 42. Correct me if I'm wrong, Anand Prabhu.
You are right. Thank you very
okay.
much.
So it's good to know that up front. No, just kidding. Okay, so we're in the section, of course, of Krishna and the pastime with the Brahmanas and the Brahmanas' wives. And we are in the section here where the Brahmanas are speaking and feeling remorseful about their behavior toward Krishna and Balaram. So let's go right into it. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay, so this verse 41. Nunam Bhagavato Maya Yoginam Api Mohini Yad Vayam Guru Vayo Niram Swarte Muyamahe Dvija. Translation: the illusory potency of the Supreme Lord certainly bewilders even the great mystics, what to speak of us. As Brahmanas, we are supposed to be the spiritual masters of all classes of men. Yet we have been bewildered about our own real interest. I'll repeat that translation. These are the Brahmanas speaking. The illusory potency of the Supreme Lord certainly bewilders even the great mystics, what to speak of us. As Brahmanas, we are supposed to be spiritual masters of all classes of men, yet we have been bewildered about our own real interest. And then verse 42. Aho pashyatya nirnam api krishne jagat guru duranta bhavam yo vidan mrityu pashan grihabi dan. Translation: just see how the unlimited love these women have developed for Lord Krishna, the spiritual master of the entire universe. This love has broken for them the very bonds of death, their attachment to family life. One more time. Just see the unlimited love these women have developed for Lord Krishna, the spiritual master of the entire universe. This love has broken for them the very bonds of death, their attachment to family life. Purport. Superficially, the husband's fathers-in-law, and so on were the ladies' gurus, or teachers. Yet the women had become perfect in Krishna consciousness, whereas the men had fallen into the darkness of ignorance. According to Srila Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur, upon returning home, the ladies showed transcendental ecstatic symptoms, such as trembling of the body, shedding of tears, standing of the bodily hairs on end, discoloration of the complexion, crying out, "O pleasure of my life, O Krishna," with faltering words, and so forth. Srila Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur goes on to state that while one may object that it's not fitting for a woman to love anyone other than her husband, here the husbands themselves point out that there are gurus only in imitation of the Supreme Lord, who is Jagat Guru, universal teacher and spiritual master. The husbands noted that the woman, having perfected the transcendental attachment for Krishna, did not have even a trace of attachment left for home, husband, children, and so forth. Therefore, from that day on, the husbands accepted those ladies as their worshipable spiritual masters and no longer thought of them as their wives or property. Okay, so good to be with all of you. Just do some invocation prayers and we'll go into some thoughts on this verse, and I want to hear from all of you as well. Om Gyan Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshuru Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Panchakalpa Tarubhyasya Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So really happy to be with all of you at the Bhakti Center. It's been a little bit of time. Had a chance to see some of you in person. Krishnadeva Prabhu, I remember seeing you just a week or two back at the Bhakti Center. So nice. And some of you are connecting online. So it's always great to see you, to check in, keeping the center as our Srimad Bhagavatam. I had a couple points, couple thoughts on this section. I think there's been so many. I think Jumana, you gave class yesterday. I had a chance to listen to a little bit of it, and hopefully can listen to more. There've been so many wonderful points that have been brought up in this story, and I'll just kind of very briefly bring the story up, bring a couple points that were coming to my mind. Wanted to bring up 3 or 4 kind of major themes that I was seeing in my mind, and then also hear from all of you as well. So in this story, we're in this section where the Brahmanas are feeling remorseful, right? So they've shunned away Krishna. They were so busy with their yajna, with their sacrifice that was happening, that they failed when the coward boys came on Krishna and Balaram's order. They failed to see them for who they are. And they said, okay, they're just these little kids. They just even ignored them. I don't even believe they addressed them. And so the coward boys went back to Krishna and told them what happened. And then Krishna and Balaram asked the coward boys to go to the wives, the Brahmanas, and said that the wives had so much devotion for them that they would feed them. And so they went to the wives, and the wives prepared all sorts of opulent food stuff and came to offer it to Krishna. And upon seeing this interaction overall, the Brahmanas were feeling remorseful and guilty that they were very kind of rude and insensitive or indifferent, you could say, right? Indifferent to Krishna and Balaram. And they began to offer this glorification, these prayers to their wives, and realizing, actually, you're way more qualified than we are, because we missed the whole point, essentially. So this is where we are in the story. I won't go too far ahead because we're still going through this chapter. And a couple of thoughts. The first thought that I wanted to share was really understanding a true Vaishnava or a true Brahmin. And this point, I don't know if it's been made recently, but it's an important point that often we see, especially in India, and this was kind of really very much addressed by some of our predecessor acharyas like Srila Bhakti Center Saraswati Thakur, where the caste system has become kind of a perversion of the 4 varnas that Krishna talks about in the Gita, in the 4th chapter, I believe, where he goes through guna karma vibhagasha. And one of the things that Srila Bhakti Center Saraswati Thakur mentioned very much is that we have to really qualify a Vir Vaishnava or Brahmana by their qualities, not by just their birth, right? And actually, nowadays, birth can actually be an impediment sometimes, because we can become very puffed up and develop a false ego based off our birth and where, family we're born in, whatever the case might be, and commit all sorts of offenses, as we saw the Brahmanas committing here. And so I wanted to, first start off with this point that, we have this kind of modern day, it's based off a pure principle, but it's kind of been perverted over the ages, or changed over the ages, where, people are taking kind of power or have a certain status because of their birth. But we can see that a true Brahmana, a Vaishnava, is actually even greater than a Brahmana of their qualities. But a true Brahmana or Vaishnava is known by their qualities, by being in touch with the mode of goodness in Srila Prabhupada, in the Gita, and the purport of this verse 413, Chaturvarna Maya Shishtam Gunakarma Vibhagasha, he mentions that the Brahmanas are known by their association with the mode of goodness. And the Kshatriyas are known by their association with the mode of passion, right? And so you can see, what does mode of goodness mean? It means sattva guna. And so all the qualities of sattva guna that are mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam and in the Gita, we can see so many different qualities of Brahmanas, but particularly their devotion, being in touch, being connected to Krishna, to God, is a big part of that. And then also many other qualities, right? Having equanimity, patience, compassion. All these are qualities of Brahminical qualities, gentleness, right? Forgiveness. Krishna talks about in the 16th chapter, I believe, around the divine qualities in the Gita. And so those qualities, the divine qualities, and he also mentions not so great qualities, that can have demoniac qualities. Those divine qualities are ones of the Brahmanas. And we can see here that also the Brahmanas, because, and it wasn't that they had negative intentions, but they were sort of disconnected, we can see, where they're performing, there's a good point that's made that they're performing yajna and sacrifice. But Krishna says in the Gita that he's the beneficiary of all sacrifices, right? Bhoktaram yajna tapsam. So in the 5th chapter. And so he says this, and they're seeing the person who's the beneficiary in front of them. They're doing this yajna, right? So you can see it's kind of a little strange. They're doing their yajna, but the person who's the beneficiary of the yajna is right in front of them, coming, Krishna and Balaram. And they're unable to actually appreciate that person, right? So there's a disconnect between the beneficiary of the yajna, who they're actually serving, and then actually being able to serve them. And the point that I want to make here is that, and we all know this, you all are actually better examples of this in terms of following this very carefully than I am, but sometimes we miss the point in our Krishna consciousness, where sometimes we follow all the rules, all the regulations, all the rituals, and we might have a great yoga practice, we have our service, we have this and everything, we're chanting, but we have to understand, and I was reminding myself, that bhakti is an emotional experience. It's a devotional reality. It's not an intellectual reality, right? The intellect is important. It's very important. We have our philosophy. It's important to engage with that. But ultimately, it's a devotional reality. And if we're not connected in, sometimes we all can sometimes lose our way a little bit, sometimes from that devotional reality. And if we're not careful, that can disconnect us from what we're doing and the source of what we're doing, which is to please Krishna and to please Radha Mulidhar. So we want to keep that in mind at all times. And so we can think the Brahmanas actually weren't really present. They weren't really present. They were kind of walking through the ritual, walking through the sacrifice, but it wasn't really going anywhere, because when Krishna's appearing, they're not connecting. And I was thinking that, even in our life, how do we apply this principle? Well, he just gave one example of how we might be doing all the kind of rules and regulations and rituals of our bhakti, vaidhi bhakti, but if we're not developing attraction or devotion, then, we want to be mindful of that. We want to continue to hone in on that so we can develop that. And I was thinking that it's also about being present, also about being present to what's going on around us. And what I mean by that is, for example, I was just talking to one of a mentor and friend of mine, and we were talking about how there's a big difference between saying, for example, it's just a basic example, but a big difference between saying the prasadam prayers, right? Mahaprasade Govinde, Namo Brahmane Vaishnave, and actually feeling grateful for the prasad on our plate, right? There's a big difference between just like saying the words, actually feeling the gratitude. And ideally, they should be connected. Sometimes they're not, right? We can become like the Brahmanas, where we're saying the right things, we're doing the right things, but we're disconnected a little bit, right? This past as we see. So there's a big difference between saying those prayers and actually feeling grateful. And this person and I were speaking, and we're thinking that, in being grateful, we can be grateful for so many things. So let's say we have a nice plate of prasad in front of us. We can be grateful not only to Krishna for giving us this food, right, to eat, but we can be grateful for every step of the way, actually, and really feel that gratitude. So we can be grateful to the earth for providing the foodstuffs for us to be able to eat and to be nourished and to take care of our body and mind, right? We can be grateful to the farmers or whoever grew the grains or crops or whatever the vegetables that we're eating, right? We're grateful to them. We're grateful to, if we're living in the city, there's a supply chain, right? That's coming from the farm, the farmers markets, all the way to us, right? And so we can be grateful to the cooks, right? For those who cut the vegetables, who cooked the food, who offered it. So all of that, at every step of the way, we can be grateful. And that's one of those ways we can stay present and kind of understand, okay, I'm grateful for this food. I'm sharing these prasadam prayers, but I'm being grateful for every step of the way, actually. I can feel grateful for not just Krishna's, and actually all of this is coming from Krishna, but his role in it, which is to provide everything, and then everyone else who's been part of that as an instrument to help me have this meal. Does that make sense? Everyone, that kind of analogy there or example? So yeah, I just wanted to mention that, like, this understanding of Brahmana as one who's developed the qualities of the mode of goodness, right? Sattva guna. And then the Brahmanas here being a little disconnected from, they're kind of Brahmanas in name. Obviously, this is a pastime, but they're Brahmanas in name. But they're kind of disconnected from the source or the essence of what they're doing. You can see they fell into the ritual side, but not so much the devotion side, where they're missing the point there. And also how we can sometimes miss the point in our life, where we can just go through our chanting, we can just go through our morning program. It's easy to kind of just autopilot through everything and just go through, okay, next, go through our day. But how can we find moments? Sometimes we miss it, it's okay. But how can we find moments and make sure that we're very sensitive to staying connected, right? And being grateful for each experience that we're having in our process of bhakti. And then we can see how the Brahmanas, they mention, to hell with this, to hell with that. They're kind of in the previous verse, they're very strong with even kind of condemning themselves, if you will, of saying that, our erudition and we're learner Brahmanas and we have this, our birth, all of this doesn't mean anything because we've, again, missed the point here. That was the first point I wanted to make. The second point I wanted to talk about was in the second verse, there's a very interesting sort of thought process that the Brahmanas were sharing toward their wives. And I wanted to talk about this briefly as well. I was thinking, and this is getting, get a little psychological here, but not really, just for the purposes of actually understanding this. So they mentioned that this love for them has broken this love for them has broken the very bonds of death, their attachment to family life. So they're talking about this. Now, I was thinking that there's sort of like 4 different types of attachments that we can have. And so sometimes we kind of read this and say attachment to family life. Okay, attachment to family life might be bad. It's a bad thing. And that can be a little detrimental, right? If we have family, husband, wife, children, all of that, it can, we don't want to develop that mindset that family life is bad. But what is it? What do the Brahmanas mean by this? So I want to understand, let's understand this. And I was thinking that there's 4 different sort of types of attachment that we can develop toward each other in this world and to Krishna, actually. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this as well. The first is, and I want to talk about, first is unhealthy attachment. This is what they're talking about. It's an unhealthy attachment. And there's unhealthy attachment, unhealthy detachment, healthy attachment, and healthy detachment. Like 4 types. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit of the intellectual here. But we'll keep it really practical for all of us. And I'm curious to how you all understand this as well. But the first, I'll talk about the first. So what are they talking about here? Attachment to family life. First is unhealthy attachment. And this is where what they're talking about is being overly identifying with the things in our life. So overly identifying with our material possessions, our family, our friends. What does that mean by overly identifying? We think that's the end all be all. And we think that this is permanent, and that we think that we're the controller. So in the purport, it's mentioned that they start to view, the Brahmanas start to view their wives not as their property or their wives, right? They start to view them as their spiritual masters. So you can see they're moving from this unhealthy attachment, that you're mine, that I, kind of in that there can be a little bit of that like lordship or controlling ship that, okay, you're part of my, you're part of me, and therefore I can tell you what to do or tell you what not to do, what not. But we can see this unhealthy attachment where when we overly identify with family, with material possessions, we think that's the end all be all. We think it's permanent when it's temporary. And we can't really see things for what they are. We can't see reality. It weakens our ability to see the reality in front of us, which is that all these relationships that we have in our life, they're temporary to some extent or another. And we're also not the controller of any of these relationships, right? And it's a hard lesson for the false ego to kind of learn, right? To really understand. But that's the reality. But when we have this unhealthy attachment, we're overly identifying, we're kind of stuck in this. And what are some examples? We're thinking of some examples. The first one that came to my mind immediately, we can see in our Vedic kind of pastimes and scriptures, is of Dhritarashtra, right? We see in the Mahabharata where Dhritarashtra he's the king. Once Pandu passes away, he becomes the king. And he's so attached to his son Duryodhana, who's very wicked, evil, cruel, all of that, and much more. And he's very attached to him. And there's so many times in the Mahabharata, it's actually quite frustrating when you're reading it, right? Where there's so many times he can kind of stop the battle from occurring, the war from occurring, just by saying, okay, enough is enough. And there's times where he does step in a little bit here and there. But he could really have stopped that. And even when Duryodhana was born, I think it was Srila Vyasadeva mentioned that actually you should have abandoned this boy, because there's so many bad omens when he was born. The jackals were braying and so many different things were happening, that there's so many bad omens that I think it was Vyasadeva had mentioned. He said to the Dhritarashtra that actually this boy will be the destruction of this entire dynasty. You should abandon him. And now we're not advocating abandoning our family, but of course we can see in the situation, it's a very extreme example of Duryodhana. But we look at the course of that whole Mahabharata situation, and there are many times that the Dhritarashtra could have acted. But he mentions actually himself, he admits in the pastimes, that in the story, that I'm so attached to my son, actually, that he couldn't properly see the reality of who his son was. Probably couldn't see that. And he was hoping that his son would act in better behavior, kind of always hoping. But seeing that his son was not doing that, had no desire to do that in any way, right? So that's one example of kind of this unhealthy attachment we can see, right? Unhealthy attachment. Also, another example that's coming to my mind, I've been reading Anuj Prabhu's, there's a book that's been out, I mentioned, around his life. And in the book, there's a story that's mentioned where when before he becomes a devotee, and he's actually going to join the temple full time, he was living with, I think, his girlfriend, or he kind of calls her his wife. In some ways, like they were very close and living together for some time. And he had then met the devotees, all of that, and he felt very inspired to join the temple. And this came to my mind very clearly because when he was planning on leaving, he was kind of selling all his things and preparing to move into the temple, all his music equipment, all of that. And his girlfriend at the time, she was very affected by this, of course, naturally. And she said he writes that, or he mentions this in one interview, I believe, and it's mentioned in the book where she kind of grabs his feet and his legs when he's leaving. And she's like, and his name was Eddie at that time. And so she says, Eddie, please don't go, don't leave. I'm not finished enjoying you yet. I'm not finished enjoying you yet. Right. And he mentions that he felt like he was kind of a piece of meat, like to be enjoyed by her. And this happens both ways. It's not just, one gender or another. We can see this example where it's like there's attachment, unhealthy attachment to like, no, you're meant for my enjoyment. So, don't go yet because I haven't finished enjoying you. Right. Again, we can see this example. So that's unhealthy attachment. Now let's move toward what does unhealthy detachment look like? I'm talking about kind of the unhealthy side of this. And unhealthy detachment, what is that? That's when we become kind of indifferent or apathetic. And it also can be kind of a symptom of escaping or escapism, right? From our duties, from our obligations. And, this is kind of a sensitive area, but so I don't want to give too many examples. I was trying to think of some good examples. There's not so many in the Vedic text that I could see. But when we think about this is kind of where like we're not taking care of people around us that we're obligated to and we have a duty to take care of. Hopefully out of love, we have a duty also, because maybe we're feeling lazy, we're feeling apathetic, we're feeling indifferent. Maybe those duties are feeling Rachini Barisha. Yeah, it's a good, okay, yeah. So there are different examples that can be there, but we're feeling like we want to escape from our kind of reality that we're having, Sometimes we kind of have this mindset that kind of creeps in where it's like, family life is not good. We need to just, focus here, give all that up. Okay, we might have that, but we want to make sure we're not being insensitive or indifferent to anyone, because we also have obligations, we have duties, we have people that are very much depending on us, right? So we have to make sure that we're doing that with extreme sensitivity and compassion, right? So, and we're managing all our affairs with really that level of compassion. So that's unhealthy detachment. That's also very dangerous, and that's dangerous because with unhealthy attachment, we're not able to see reality as it is, right? Because we think that this is the end all be all. We look at the Drashta and Duryodhana. With unhealthy detachment, we tend to create a lot of damage because people don't feel loved and cared for, right? They don't feel loved and cared for. And for a healthy society, we need healthy families, we need healthy communities where people are feeling loved, they're feeling appreciated, they're feeling valued. Those are all important factors in that. So unhealthy detachment is also something to be mindful of. We don't want to be artificially renouncing things, saying, oh, we're detached, but actually we're trying to escape from the reality, from our obligations, our duties, right? So we can see that. And sometimes we can see that honestly in our spiritual communities, because it's kind of like, it's easy sometimes to kind of like want to renounce everything. Okay, I'm done, no job, no this, like, okay, I'm totally done with everything and focus. But we can see, okay, if we're being honest, are we doing that for our own kind of escapism, or are we doing that actually because it's our calling to do that, right? Sometimes. Now let's move toward kind of the healthy side. There's healthy detachment and healthy attachment. And healthy detachment is something that also is exemplified by the wives of the Brahmanas. So they what we're talking about when it comes to like seeing someone as our property or seeing someone as like we're the controller, that's unhealthy attachment, right? But there's healthy detachment. And we can see this example, and there's healthy attachment. They're both different sides of the same coin, if you will. Healthy detachment is where we know that we don't own anything. We're not the controllers. We are not the proprietors. We're the stewards. We're the guardians of everything that's entrusted to our care. We're the guardians of that. So if we are a parent, if we are a spouse, if we're a brother or sister, son, daughter, whatever the case might be, friend, temple president, servant, whatever the case is, everything that's given in our care, we're not the proprietor because we know that we're playing a role. We're playing a role, and our job is to do our role to the best of our ability to please Krishna and to serve whoever's in front of us. with care and love. And so if we keep that in mind, then we're not going to get into this kind of false ego battle, power control, where we want to be the end all be all against unhealthy attachment that can be formed. But there's a healthy detachment of knowing that if I'm a parent, my job is to protect, love, and raise the best child I can, right? And to do that, it's also a role. It's a temporary role that I have in this lifetime, but it's also a very important role that I have. I need to take it very seriously, do it to the best of my abilities, but also knowing that I'm not entitled to the results of what I'm doing, right? Now, let's say this parent might serve this child for so many years. The child grows up and might completely, kind of decide to go take their life in a different direction than what they were given. And it's very humbling, right? To kind of like see that even people that we might have invested in or a service that we might have done, at one point it was going in one direction and it goes in a different direction. And this is kind of the basic principle of karma yoga, this healthy detachment, where Krishna says very clearly that we're entitled to our service, we're entitled to our duty, but we're not entitled to the results of that. We're not entitled to the results because we're not the controller. And so we can do our best, and we should do our best, but every role that we have, we're playing a role of being a steward, of being a guardian of that. We're a temple president for a few years, in a few years, that's beautiful, but in the scheme of eternity, how long is that really, right? And so we should be thinking that if I'm doing this service for a couple of years, how can I do the best job I can to set up the future to be successful as well, not just in the present moment. We're playing a role. And we can see an example of this is Mother Kunti, and there's so many different examples, but the one that came to my mind, we're speaking of Dhritarashtra, looking at another parent, Mother Kunti, she's very much involved with the Pandavas in their life, giving them guidance, loving them, raising them, giving them positive affirmation, encouragement, all of that. But also as they become older and wiser and their character is developing in a positive and empowered way, and they have Krishna, she starts to also give them space to make their own decisions. Right? Give them space to make their own decisions and to explore who they are and what they want to do, versus always telling them what to do, right? So there's a healthy detachment from that, from her family, and letting them kind of take the reins and be who they are. And then lastly, we have this healthy attachment that can develop. And this is, and part of attachment is we need to be attached to something, actually. Sometimes we kind of put attachment down. We're like, we shouldn't have any attachments, we shouldn't have any material attachments. Yes, we want to develop that, where we're not having that unhealthy attachment to the material. But we need attachment so we can take this propensity to be attached. And as the Brahmana's wives do, we can be attached to Krishna, right? And to our services. And, again, we talked about healthy detachment. Healthy attachment is kind of the opposite side of the same coin, where we're attached to Krishna, we're attached to, positive Sangha, and our love increases with this. This is actually where our love increases, where we're attached to kind of the eternal relationship, not what's temporary in this world, something that's way more eternal, that's even more fulfilling than most of the relationships, and practically any relationship in this world can give us, because that relationship is eternal, and at a much deeper level, at a soul-to-soul level. And we can also develop healthy attachment for Guru and for the devotees also as well. There's nothing wrong with that as well. We have devotees who are lifesavers in all our lives, right? Who have helped us through so many different situations. There's so many different trials and tribulations. So we can develop attachment to their lotus feet as well, because they're kind of really guiding us and helping us in really helping us develop spiritually as well. So that's important as well. So I kind of wanted to talk about these 4 levels. I know that was a lot, but we talked about unhealthy attachment, which is kind of exemplified by Dhritarashtra. And also we gave an example of Ananda Prabhu's life he mentioned. We talked about unhealthy detachment that can also be there, which can be a form of escapism. Then there's healthy detachment and healthy attachment. And then lastly, I want to end off as well. There's a wonderful point here that's also made, and I want to end off with this point of how the Brahmanas recognize their wives as guru, as spiritual master. And this is an important point. I know it's kind of a debated point in different sanghas, and it's kind of controversial, it seems like these days. But I want to talk about it from the perspective of Srimad Bhagavatam, where, Mother's Day is coming up in just 2 weeks as well. And it's mentioned, even in the Srimad Bhagavatam, that there's 7 mothers, seven different types of mothers. There's the real mother that we have, which is kind of like our first guru, if we really think about it, helping us and thinking about my own mother and how much she's helped me grow, not just materially, but also very much spiritually. And like those initial samskars and impressions are so important, actually, and they're given by the mother particularly often. So we have the real mother, we have the wife of the spiritual master, the wife of the Brahmana. So they're right here, wife of the Brahmanas, the wife of the king, the queen, the cow is also mother, as we know, the nurse, and also the earth. We also call the earth Bhumi Mata, right? Mother Earth, because the Mother Earth is giving so much. And I was thinking that, how beautiful is it if we can kind of shift our mindset outside of, kind of this and we can see the Brahmanas do this, outside of this gender kind of, not battle, but kind of this lens that we often see things through, right? Where we see people through gender, we see people through the color of their skin or their background or their birth, caste. We talked about the caste. And in our spiritual path, this is actually kind of irrelevant, actually. We shouldn't be thinking in this way. We don't want to be thinking in this way. And we can see that guru, similar to the qualification of Brahmana and Vaishnava, as we talked about earlier, is not through birth or the gender that we have or whatever the case might be. It's through qualification of realization and wisdom and devotion, right? It's through that we can see, we can discern who's a Vaishnava, Vaishnavi, and who's Brahmana, who's Brahminical, who has that love that's developed for Krishna. And we have different examples. We have the Brahmanas' wives here, who the Brahmanas take as their spiritual masters, because they can see that you don't have the learning and all the kind of, we studied all the Vedas and all of that. You don't have that, but you have devotion for Krishna, and that's actually what counts. So we're missing the point here. And we can see so many different examples. I was even just thinking of Janava Mata, the wife of Lord Nityananda, during the festival in Ketari, when Mahaprabhu had left and Narottam Das Thakur had arranged this huge festival. She was honored as the senior most Vaishnava there, senior most devotee there, and really honored in that way. She addressed the entire Vaishnava community after Mahaprabhu left. And she was given that status, that position, because she was Janava Mata. And so we should really, and then we look at Queen Kunti as well. She's a guru to the Pandavas, as mentioned, particularly Yudhishthira, Arjuna, and Bhima as well. So we can kind of view this as just thinking, one, that we shouldn't get too much caught up on who's who. But we should look at what type of devotion they have, what type of wisdom do they have, and keep that in mind. But then also we can see how also our spouses, our partners, our devotees in our community, how can we all be teachers to each other, actually? If we look at any relationship, particularly those intimate relationships in our lives, instead of viewing, someone as lesser than or greater than, or, this person as guru and that person's not as guru, whatever the case might be, how can we see everyone as our teacher, actually? And this is where the Brahmanas come to, where they're not seeing their wives as their wives or their property or something like that, but they're seeing them as teachers. I have so much to learn from this individual. And we can see that from anyone in our lives, particularly our partners. But we can look at our family, we can look at our friends or different sangha that we have, and we can always ask ourselves, what can I learn from this individual? And we'll find that there's at least one thing. There's often dozens and dozens of things, but at least one or two things that we can take away and really see and learn from each person in our life, particularly those that are intimate in our life, like a spouse or a son or daughter or partner, whatever the case might be. And that's what the Brahmanas did. So I want to end off here. I talked a lot of different things, but first bit, just understanding what a true Vaishnava is, Brahmana. The Brahmanas here kind of missed the point, as we've seen the past time. Devotion is important. We talked about attachment, the 4 types of attachment, and then just understanding guru and not getting fixated so much on, gender and caste and all these different kind of considerations, but looking at devotion, looking at what we can learn from everyone around us. I want to end off there. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll open up for any questions, comments, thoughts, concerns.
Thank you, Anuj Prabhu. Jamuna Jaya, followed by Rupesh Kumar the 5th.
Hare Krishna, Anuj, as always, just such a wonderful class. I just get so happy when I see your name. Please don't stay away so long anymore. Just 3 quick things. There are many more things, but things I was thinking about in your, as you were saying, unhealthy and healthy, I took out my piece of paper and I wrote like healthy and unhealthy. And it was funny because you said Dhritarashtra, which of course was the first person I thought of unhealthy. But then I thought, what a contrast to Dasarat. Dasarat in the Ramayana, he starts unhealthy because he doesn't want to let Ram go, but then he does let him go, in the end. And so I thought that's interesting that we see is he doesn't want to let him go with the sages at first, but he does let him go. And the other contrast that you, Ayendra Prabhu, I thought it was interesting that his girlfriend said, holding onto his feet. And of course, when he left his body, it's reportedly that he was found holding onto the feet of his deity. So I thought there's 2 things that contrast. And one other thing that something I heard recently in a class, because the idea of being too attached to family members and stuff, something that rolls in my mind a lot. And it was something I thought was going to be problematic to my bhakti path at the beginning, because I'm quite attached to my husband, as anybody knows, and my mom. But something that my Guru Dev said, he said that we can use our good relationships in our lives to make good samskaras about what a relationship is. Because a lot of people don't want to think of Krishna as a person, don't want to think of a relationship because they've been so burned by material relationships. And so having good relationships is actually an opportunity to make a good positive samskara that relationships in the spiritual plane are not even as good as that, but they're even better. So I thought that was an interesting point.
Yeah. No, thank you. Those are all just incredible points, and love what you mentioned about Maharashtra. And that's true. He changed, and that's actually a better example because he went from that unhealthy attachment and then actually transformed that. And I love your point around that. Actually, spiritual relationships, like you mentioned, even in this world, can give us a glimpse of what it can be, to your point. So yeah, we definitely don't want to let those go. So yeah, I love that. Thank you. Thank you.
Let's acknowledge Shri Radha Muladhar, Shri Gaura Chandra. They're giving us their darshan. Let's take the darshan. Let's turn our cameras on for a minute if we can. Thank you very much, dear
We can
devotees.
spotlight them if possible.
Yeah, we are.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. All right, I think it's the time. Okay, there she is. All right. Okay, welcome to the Afterglow. Rupesh Kumar Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Anuj Prabhu, beautiful, beautiful class after a long, long time, Prabhuji. Truly blessed. Hare Krishna.
Well, thank you.
A few humble thoughts to share. Forgive me if I'm in this path of ignorance. But just thinking of it, beautiful thought about the Trikarana Shuddhi, which is Manasa, Vacha, Karmana, which is the mind, words, and actions being in inline, so that everything's that's a true Brahmanic perspective of how we need to be. That's true.
Yeah.
The second aspect that you shared, the
Love
mother's
that.
beautiful sentiment, beautiful thoughts. That there's a saying I'm not sure, but there's usually I've heard a lot about this, that in these millions of lifetimes, every being has been our mother. The insect, the worm, the we see male, it's not male or female. Every being has been our mother in some form, and definitely that's a great reverence that we need to pay to all human beings, including the people, the devotees, like I would say Adipurush Prabhu might have been my mother in that X millionth lifetime, who had brought me to this path of bhakti or devotion. So we should pay humble obeisance to all those beings, definitely, for sure. So one thing that I was a bit lost is, and I wanted to realize more is, when we are saying about attachment and detachment, I guess the attachment and detachment of these Dasharatha and Dhritarashtra are in interesting cases, because the social landscape back then was a bit different, and Dashratha was an exalted Rajarshi. He's not like an ordinary person like us, right? Otherwise, all those mantras that we speak, we do not say Rama, the son of Dashratha, right? Dashra. Huh? So that's one. So it was not mundane attachment that he was practicing. It was more on a spiritual level. Who will take care of the kingdom? Who will take care of the people? So I guess before we ourselves realizing the entire path of bhakti, it's better to steer away from judging them. And the reason why I'm saying that, there are many grihasthas in these and in this conversation, and the idea why Dhritarashtra and Gandhari were an intellectual because he was blind, and then Gandhari blindfolded herself, and the Shakuni was the master conspirator who kind of caused this hate in this Duryodhana for Krishna. Unlike Kunti, who carefully, the mother, again the mother, she carefully kind of built the devotion of bhakti in Pandavas for Krishna. So I guess from that sense, we need to be more caring about our kids as the Krishna's blessing, and then take care of them more rather than fully being detached. Saying that, because the thought is completely different here, like, okay, let's go of the kids and all, because we are not that level of sannyas and everything. So I think we need to take care. I like the little kids of Krishna Sangha that we saw the other day in Bhakti Center. So really take care of those kids as Krishna's blessings, and build Krishna's devotion in them, is something that we can aspire for. Yeah. Hare Krishna Prabhu. I think I said a lot. Maybe you can share your perspective.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Prabhu. And to your point, around Dashrath and Dhritarashtra, I think with Dashrath, of course, he's a devotee, and that attachment to Lord Ram is not anything mundane. So your point well taken. And I don't think anyone's judging him. I think Jumanji was making the point that his attachment transformed into like kind of wanting what he wanted, and then also seeing what the plan was of Lord Ram and the pastime of Lord Ram, and facilitating that. Initially, he was very heartbroken, of course, as a father would be. But the example of Dhritarashtra, we can see there is an unhealthy attachment where, because he's like, if the example is given that he's blind physically, he's also blind kind of spiritually, because he has so many advisors and devotees around him, like Vidura and Vyasdev and different people. Krishna is giving, even Krishna himself is giving advice and coming to prevent the war many times, but he's unable to really heed that because he has this attachment to Duryodhana, very much so, where it becomes, and obviously this is all part of the story, the pastime. We can see that that's there, but I appreciate your thoughts, and definitely agree that even with when we talk about our children and our societies, our families, we have to be very careful, very diligent to make sure that we are being as loving as possible, and raising kind of the future in a very loving, caring way. So definitely agree with that, especially in our devotee Sangha. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Is there a question by Venetia, I believe? Your hand's up.
Hare Krishna. Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Beautiful class, just very expertly and sensitively handled. I think this, we all acknowledge that this can be some sensitive territory in a modern context. And I'm wondering if you could just say a little bit more about the bonds of death in the first in the first passage. That it was through their attachment to Krishna and their devotion to Krishna that they had actually broken the bonds of death. And then there's that hyphen, and then it says I think I don't have the verse in front of me, but the attachment to their family. And so I'm wondering are those bonds of death more to be understood culturally, because without their families in those days, they essentially would perish or would be so shamed or would be potentially even, I don't know, put to death, or how are we to understand those bonds of death?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'd say different ways you can understand it, maybe culturally as well. The way that's maybe part of that. The way I understood it, and I would love to hear from different devotees too, what you think, and different senior devotees here as well, is that these bonds of death, meaning that these attachments or these relationships being temporary. So at the time of death, they're kind of cut, right? If you think about it from that perspective, our relationships in this world, they're temporary with each other, in many ways, in most ways, actually. And so at the time of death, these relationships change. They change. Some of them disappear. They change. We have that eternal relationship with Krishna, obviously, but that's the perspective that I took when they mentioned that that these relationships, the love for Krishna has broken the very bond of death, their attachment to family life. It's the temporary nature of this fleeting world that we live in, and how the time of death is actually a pivotal point of change. In the grand scheme, it's actually not that much change, but for this body in this lifetime, it's the most drastic change, I think.
So those bonds that are normally broken by death, they broke sort of in advance through their attachment. Oh, wonderful! Thank you so much. That's so helpful.
And that's what's mentioned even in the spiritual path, where we're dying before dying.
Right.
Mentioned, where it's like in our spiritual growth, we're actually giving up the false ego. Slowly we're developing attachment and love and developing that devotion. And so we're the point is that, as Srila mentions, that when we get to the time of death, that we're actually ready to leave. That we're deeply realized, hopefully, and that we're able to leave this world in a glorious way. That's the point. So yeah. Thank you for your question.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah, very well.
Vaisheshika Prabhu has this concept that he calls preemptive giving. He says everything will be taken away from you, whether you're attached to it or detached from it. Everything will be taken away from you. So why not preemptively give it to Krishna now? Preemptive giving by Vaisheshika Prabhu. Thank you very much for reminding us of that concept, Anuj Prabhu and Venetia. And was that question from Venetia or from Whiskey Das?
I was relaying it, from my guru here. Sleeping next to me.
Nice. Okay, Adipusha Prabhu, you have anything to add? Besides the fact that you're Rupesh Prabhu's father or mother? Brother.
The perfect presentation.
Okay.
Very important point about how Krishna is so wonderful that he puts a supporting cast in our life. And sometimes we make ourselves into like a monologue, reduce everybody else to wallpaper, and therefore we're limited in our own conditioned perspective, and we don't appreciate the fact that other people can see things we can't see. The Landmark Forum, they do this thing with a pie chart, and there's a small, with a pie chart, like a round, like a, I don't know, It's a round circle, and like a pie. And then there's a little slice of what we know. I know how to make chapatis. I know how to, wash my hands. Then there's another slice of what we don't know. I don't know how to build a nuclear submarine. Different things. And then the most of the pie chart is stuff we don't know that we don't know. Stuff that we don't really even know that we don't know it. And so Krishna, in every group of people, every family, every religious community, every situation we put ourselves in life, there are other people. The Chinese expression is guanghuo, to see the fire from across the river. There are other people that can tell us, because they're not involved directly in our experience. They can, you know what your problem is? It's so easy for other people to see what we can't see. And if we're welcomed, that's why the morning class is very interesting. Someone is speaking and other people can, Prabhu already made this point, other people can help us. The devotees derive great satisfaction and bliss. Krishna says, enlightening one another and conversing about me. So it's not just a monologue. And we're all able to contribute, and it's much more rich and complete. Anyway, Krishna is so wonderful that he makes that arrangement for us. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you for class. Very nice class, Prabhu.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we felt like Ayendra Prabhu is empowering Anuj Prabhu. He's in the back, right? Anuj Prabhu, am I seeing correctly? Is that Ayendra Prabhu?
Yeah, that's a picture of him. Yeah. A little wall here of some photos of.
Who else is there besides Ayendra?
I'll show you that next time. I'll show Prabhupada there, and also different other pictures.
Okay. Yeah, see, that's what's on our wall. Okay. With this, we'd like to wrap it up. Thank you, Anuj Prabhu. Beautiful class, beautiful presentation, expert, nice, philosophical, personal. Thanks for engaging everybody. Have a wonderful Sunday. Seek the association of the devotees. Go to the temple if you can, and come back tomorrow. Srimad Bhagavatam never ends. Hare Krishna. Love you all. Hadi Bol. Nice seeing everybody. Hare Krishna.